Hi team, you're here with Coach Chicken Legs, here to help coaches and PTs improve their programming quickly. So team, the next couple of videos are going to be about breaking down programming into simple, digestible steps. We're going to apply more and more rules to your programming to try to make the process easier. We're going to call it the limiter principles. So the idea is the more limitations you add to your skill set, the less difficult the programming will become. It's already hard enough to be able to do programming, let alone having 1,000 options in it. I want you to think about two different clients. Client one comes to you and says, I want to feel better. What does that mean? I have no idea what that means. I could give them $100 and they're probably going to feel better. I could tell them that they look beautiful and that could make them feel better, but it's a very difficult metric to measure. So when I go to program someone who wants to feel better, I don't know where to start. So it's a really hard space to program in. But if a client comes to us and says, I want to lose 10 kilos, I'm currently 30% body fat, I would like to increase my 1RM squat, I would like to train 3 days a week for 1 hour a day, and no more, no less. I hate running, don't make me run, but I love doing bicep curls. They've given us a lot of limits, which is fantastic to help us write our program for them. So what we're going to do is going to apply our own limiter principles to help narrow down our skill set when we're writing programs. The first of the limiter principles is identifying what movement patterns that our body do. Now, the movement patterns, you will see 1,000 different ways to do this. This is just the way I like. I've dissected it down to 9 movement patterns. There are surely more, but the 9 that I see the most, we're going to discuss now. When you know your 9, it will help narrow down the different things to program around. Okay, so of our 9, the first 3 are these: our push, our pull, and our plank. After that, we have our squat, lunge, and hinge movements. And finally, we have our ground to standing, our gait, and our crawl. Most movements you're going to see in the gym and most movements that you're going to program around are built around these 9 movement patterns. So when you look at my programs and when you watch my tutorials, I'm always going to refer to these 9 patterns. I can usually tell what movement or exercise the client is doing by which joints they're using. Okay? When we're looking at the upper body, there's push, pull, and planking. There's usually going to use the joints around our elbows, our shoulders, and our spine, but mainly our elbows and our shoulders. For the lower body, our squat, lunge, hinge, I'm looking for the joints of the ankles, the knees, and the hip. And for our ground to standing, gait, and crawl, I'm looking more for our spine movements, okay, and our ankles. But these are always a good giveaway of which movement they're using. So let's break it down. If I'm doing a push movement, it's common that I'll be using my elbow and shoulder joints. Okay? That's a giveaway that it's in this space, that it's a push or a pull. For a push, any movement that involves putting our hands away from us, that is a push movement. Hands away is push. Hands towards is pull. So if I'm grabbing something and pulling it towards me, the hands are coming closer to the midline, that's a pull movement. And a plank movement is any time that my core is moving and holding itself on an angle. That could be a true plank position, or it could just be an angled hold. The plank is usually a secondary movement. We don't necessarily train it and see it a lot done in isolation, with of course the exception of a plank itself, but we do see it supporting these movements. Let's have a look at an example. If I was to do a push-up, functionally it is a push movement because that's our main focus with that exercise. But you can't do a push-up without holding a plank in some fashion. You must stay structurally secure. Same with a pull. If I was to do a bent over row, yes, although the pull is the main movement because I'm bringing the barbell towards me, the plank is what's allowing me to be able to hold the position. So the plank is often done as a secondary movement to everything else. But we do like to strengthen it when we're finding that the client might have core instability issues. Our squat, our lunge, and our hinge, I look at the knees and the hips. Your squat is usually a movement where our knee is bending, bringing us up and down from the ground, either bringing our legs towards or away from us at the knee joint. Okay? Lunge is similar. The only difference is when we perform a lunge, our legs are split. So a squat, our legs are together, but a lunge, our legs are split. And humor me, and let's say that's someone who's got split legs. A hinge movement is when your hip is the main joint that's moving, like this. So our legs might be straight as we perform a hinge movement. So an example of a squat, who would have thought? A lunge is a lunging movement, who would have thought? And the hinge is a little bit tricky. So I want you to think about a straight-legged deadlift. Since my legs don't move and my hip is the thing that's shifting, that is a true hinge movement. Also, it could be said that a good morning is a true hinge movement. If I do a front straight bar deadlift, I have to bend my knees a little bit. So it is still a hinge movement because the majority of what I'm doing is hinge, but we're introducing a little bit of a squat. If I was to do a hex bar deadlift, since this bar around us encourages almost all knee movement, I would actually put it in the category of a squat. So note that not all movements are strictly one of these. Sometimes they're a combination of all. You'll notice that I've grouped all these things in groups of 3. That's because these are where they often seem to link together. Now that's not true in every state, but if I was doing a leg day or getting a client to do a leg day, it's common that I'll get them to do a squat, a lunge, and a hinge in the same space. Same true as a push, a pull, and a plank. I'll probably getting them to do those things in the same space. However, if you're a bodybuilder or an isolation client, so you're trying to get a client to isolate a muscle, you might have a day that's completely dedicated to push, or a day that's completely dedicated to pull. It doesn't matter. This is not a set rule, but it's a good kind of guide that I like to link these things together. In a giant CrossFit setting, in a big group class that has an ongoing circuit, you might find that every single one of these movements is performed. Not uncommon either. Our ground to standing is exactly that. It's our client lying on the floor and then coming back tall. This could be seen as a burpee, or it could be truly just them lying on the floor and standing back up. This movement is so crucial because it's one of the first ones we lose as we age. As your client degenerates and starts to atrophy their muscle mass, one of the first skills that they lose is the ability to ground to stand. It's the same with morbidly obese clients. As they get heavier, they lose this ability to do it naturally. So a good test for your client is if they can't do ground to stands effortlessly, it's starting to put them in the mindset for you that you might need to spend some time on that client. Next is gait. Gait just means walking. It means your foot moving all the way through the cycle of a walk, okay? From heel to toe, up, then heel to toe again. So gait just means to walk. That could be running, that could be walking, that could be holding kettlebells and going for a farmer's carry, just any time that the client is walking. Crawl is exactly as it sounds. Crawling along the floor could be bear crawls, could be crab crawls, it could be a mobility crawling drill. It doesn't matter, but you'll notice that these movements are usually lots of joints in one space. It's lots of things moving together. So these ones I usually see a little bit more in recovery and functional health training. These ones you see a little bit more in bodybuilding and muscle isolation training. But that's not a rule of thumb. You could see any of these in any space, but traditionally, particularly at the beginning level, you often see, hey team, if you're liking this content, what I need you to do is follow us, support us, leave comments. We're here to help programmers be better at programming, make coaches and PTs the best of the best that we can, and it starts with programming and it starts with you. Share, like, subscribe. Ground to standing, gait, and crawl in functional training, warm-ups and recovery, and you see squat, lunge, hinge, plank, pull, push in more isolating bodybuilding hypertrophy style training. Again, not a rule of thumb, and as you get better, you'll start mixing these together, but when you first start off, not a bad idea to isolate them into buckets of stuff that's helping you grow muscle and stuff that's helping you with your health. Now, why do we need these? What's the point of understanding the 9 movement patterns? Well, if I can understand the main patterns that my workout is built around for the day, it tells me how to warm up my client. This is where it gets really, really helpful to I know what my workout is built around. So if I have a client that today they are working on squats, it is a leg day, they are squatting, I know that the main joint that's being used is going to be the knee. So as I'm performing a warm-up, I know that if the knee's the main joint, I look at the muscles above the knee and the muscles below the knee in the warm-up. I then think to myself, are any of those muscles tight on the client? And are any of those muscles loose on the client? Normally, the client's going to tell you they have tight glutes or tight quads. This is good because one of the rules of thumb of the warm-up is I'm trying to loosen the tight shit and tighten the loose shit. That's a really good rule of thumb while staying in your scope of practice. Whilst I'm warming up my client, I know that the knee is the main joint that's moving. I know the muscles above and below it roughly, the calf, the tibularis anterior, the quad, the hamstring. I'm gonna ask the client what they feel is tight and what they feel is loose. They might not know what's loose. It's a harder thing to identify, but almost every client will tell you that something's tight. They can definitely feel that. You might even be able to feel that on yourself. So what we're gonna get the client to do is loosen up the tight stuff with foam rolling, voodoo flossing, massage ball, pressure point gun, whatever you wanna use. And then we're gonna move them through this movement pattern, nice and light, to be able to tell the muscle and the joint that that movement is coming in our workout. That's the point of this. We want to know what patterns we're using for the day so I have a better idea of which joints and muscles I should be looking at in my warm-up. Too true is if I'm doing a beautiful rehab session and I know my client is having issues around the squat, lunge, and hinge, I can program my recovery around the relative joints and muscles. So if they're having issues with the hinge, I can think of the hip joint. What is above it and what is below it? It could be that the client has tight glutes and hamstrings. So I might spend some time asking the client to foam roll that space. Fantastic, we've identified a problem. And then we might see that the client has really weak hip flexors. So we might ask them to do some glute hip bridges. It doesn't matter. Remember that you're not a physio. All we're doing is identifying a joint, identifying the muscles above and below it, and offering the client to engage in some personal release. They can use the foam roller, they can use the voodoo floss band. I'm not telling you to grab and touch your client, but all we're doing is giving ourselves context around what joint and muscle is being used on the day. If we had a hypertrophy session, then we can identify what the big boys are that we're trying to train for the day. So if I'm doing a big lunge session or I want big squats, big lunges, and big deadlifts on the day, I can factor in that the joints that are going to be used and the muscles that are going to be fatigued. So I can tailor in the warm-up the joints and muscles that are related to these movements to give my client the best chance of performing really well and not getting injured during their movements. So why are we even bothering with this type of warm-up? Because we're trying to make our client injury-proof. As our client goes through training, they're naturally gonna tighten up in spots. They're gonna come to you with injuries they have, or they might have developed injuries throughout their lives. That's okay. Not every client's gonna wanna do rehab, and not every client needs necessarily to do rehab, but it's your due diligence to make sure that you're giving the client the best chance they have to improve in their health during your program. You should be trying to make them injury-proof, not encouraging an injury. Without our understanding of the 9 patterns and how to rehab and how to warm up and how to use them, you might find that you're leading your client down pathways that could result in injuries for them. This understanding the 9 patterns also helps me with writing programs. If my client only wants to work out 3 times a week and they care about function, longevity, and health, I can make one day a push-pull plank day, one day a squat lunge hinge day, and one day a grounder standing gait and crawl day. If my client wants to work out 5 times a week, I can have a push-pull, a lunge squat, a hinge grounder standing, a gait plank, doesn't matter. But I am trying in my week of programming for people, fitting in every single one of these movement patterns. I might not necessarily get them to heavily focus on one, but I'm certainly fitting all of them in. So again, if I have a bodybuilding client or a hypertrophy client, the main body of the workout will be built around plank, pull, push, squat, hinge, lunge and hinge, and their warm-ups and recovery and cool down will be related to ground to standing, gait and crawl, probably. Okay, again, no rule of thumb. These are just giving you some parameters to work around. So even in a group class for the week, I'm hoping to get every one of these movements done at some point. So let's recap. We are starting to apply programming limiters on ourselves so that way we don't have so many options, so we can start writing more clearly designed programs for clear issues. We must understand that movements will fall into these 9 patterns, or that's what I've seen, at least in my experience. We understand that push, pull, plank usually like to sit together. Squat, lunge, and hinge usually like to sit together. Ground to standing, gait, and crawl usually like to sit together. These movements tell us how to program. They tell us which joint and muscles are being used. And they're also going to tell us how your program's going to stack. Okay? In hypertrophy alone, we might isolate these different movement patterns, and in functional and health training, I might glunk all of these movements together. But try to understand this team, and I want you to think about what movements inside your own training fall into these categories. What exercises are you doing in your own training, and where do they sit in these 9 movements? Which ones are you doing, and which ones are you potentially not doing at all? What you'll find is that injuries will occur in the movement pattern that you're not doing. So if I spend all my time doing push, pull, plank, squat, hinge, and lunge, you might find that an injury will arise because you're not strong in the ground to standing, gait, and crawl. Same true if you're doing a lot of CrossFit and you're doing a lot of running, or you're doing a lot of ground to standing, or you're doing a lot of crawling. You might find that injuries start arising in the push-pull-plank space because you're not doing them very often. A balance between the 9 is usually the best way to go for longevity and health. If someone is sports specific, or if someone is very deliberately trying to train one thing, less relevant because the trade-off for that one thing might be health. But if the client is a health-centric client, these things balanced between their program is really relevant, so we don't develop strength imbalance in any one of them. Hopefully that was helpful, team. This is breaking down the 9 movement patterns. Reach out if you have any questions. Like us on Facebook, like us on YouTube, do all the social media stuff.